Salam everyone. So in this lecture, we'll take up this simple question, yet a very important one. Is it haram to wear silk garments, brocade, bracelets for both men and women? Because it's a very common thing, and I've been asked this question several times as far as the dress is concerned, or especially as far as wearing gold bracelets, for example, for men, or wearing silk shirts for men are considered haram, right? Or forbidden for men, especially. Whereas women, they can wear gold, they can also wear brocade, embroidery and whatnot. But for men, it's typically, there's several hadiths, so to speak, which various scholars have gathered within the Muslim world, and they have and seem to have a consensus that men will not be wearing silk because of a certain hadith. So in this lecture, I'm going to explore what the Quran says about wearing silk garments, wearing brocade, and wearing bracelets. So what I've done is compiled all the verses within all of the surahs in the Quran that talks about the word silk, talks about the word brocade, and then talks about the word bracelets. Okay? And after I'm done with this, then I'm also going to refer to certain ahadith. So you can actually do a comparative analysis and see for yourself exactly how and why and who actually made all of these things haram, or whether they are haram or not, according to the Quran or according to the Prophet Muhammad. So we will explore this question in depth. So by the end of this lecture, you'll have a very clear understanding, and then you can decide for yourself. And wait for the conclusion, because it's very important. You'll be surprised what the conclusion holds to this particular question, because what I've done in the conclusion part is I've gone through all these verses and also formulated a criteria of who is going to be wearing silk garments, who's going to be wearing brocade and bracelets and other things. Okay, so I've also compiled a list of verses in the Quran which are essentially the same here, but you will see the conclusion, the criteria of this particular instance as well. So without further ado, let's get started. And those of you who do not know my work, my name is Dr. Said Raza. I've been researching the Quran. I'm a student of this book for the last about 8 or 10 years now. And typically my methodology is that I take a particular question and then I formulate all the instances of that particular word, essentially doing some detailed analysis of all the occurrences of a particular word within the Quran, and then trying to understand, because the Quran claims to be a complete book. It also claims that it has all the answers, because it also claims that God has explained everything in this book. So this is a book of guidance for mankind. It's not just for a particular group of people, right? Muslims, for example, it's just for everyone. So if you were to seek guidance from God, this is the book, claims to be complete, challenges mankind to bring forth such surahs, and so on. So, and it of course is a consistent book. It also claims that it does not have any inconsistency. Okay, so apart from all of that, if you want to watch other videos, you can do so. I've answered most of the questions there, done my research. But here, let's stick to this question: is it haram to wear silk garments, brocade, and bracelets, or not? Okay. All right. So first things first, the word silk in the Quran has occurred 3 times. Okay, so there are 3 occurrences of the word silk in Surah 18, verse 31, Surah 44, verse 53, and then Surah 76, verse 21. So the word silk exists in the Quran. Secondly, the word brocade occurs 4 times in the Quran. In Surah 18, which is common to the first part where silk is mentioned. It also mentions brocade in chapter 18 or Surah 18, verse 31, chapter 44, verse 53, chapter 55, verse 54, and chapter or Surah 76, verse 20. And thirdly, there are 5 occurrences of the word bracelets in the Quran. Once again, in chapter 18, chapter 22, chapter 35, chapter 43, and then chapter 76. So you'll also notice within this chart right here on your screen that most of these verses are common. In other words, the words silk, brocade, and bracelets are being used in pretty much the same surah. For example, the Surah 18 has the word, or Surah 18 verse 31 has the word silk. Surah 18 verse 31 also has the word brocade. And Surah 18 verse 31 also has the word bracelet. So in one single sentence, God has mentioned all these three words. So we'll explore each one of these surahs and verses in context. So I'm not just going to pick particular surah because that's typically, in my humble opinion, it's kind of dangerous because you cannot just pick one verse out of the Quran. You need to understand the context, what is being spoken of, what is God guiding us to do, right? So we'll explore each one of these, and then once we're done with this particular methodology, you will have a solid of understanding and deciding whether it's haram to wear silk garments, brocade, and bracelets. I'm also going to touch base on the hadith as well. So typically I stick to the Quran only research, but this time I'm going to do just a quick comparison and I'll demonstrate which are hadith numbers so you can actually see, and I'm going to demonstrate those as well. All right, so before I actually jump into Surah 18, which is chapter 18 verse 31, in other words, this is Surah al-Kahf, right, the cave. So this is the first instance of the word silk, of the word brocade, and the word bracelets occurred in the same chapter. Okay, so let's explore that. But once again, before I explore this, let's take a look at who actually made this haram and why is it haram. Okay, so let's navigate to the hadith, or the sayings of the prophet, right? Okay, now once we take a look at those, then we'll come back to the Quran, and towards the end, when we're done, you'll have a very clear picture of what's going on and what is right, what is haram, and what is not haram, or what the deal is. All right, so let's navigate to the Sunnah quickly. So if you go to sunnah.com/Bukhari /77, this is the Sahih al-Bukhari, which is the considered as one of the most authentic books in the Muslim world. People follow this, wholeheartedly, diligently. But believe it or not, majority of the Muslims I've come across personally, they have no clue about the hadith. Okay, they never actually read any one of these. All right, so in chapter 25, the book of dress within Sahih al-Bukhari, the wearing of silk clothes by men. So this hadith number is Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 5828, book number 77, hadith number 45, volume 7, book 72, and hadith 718. So it's narrated by Aba Uthman al-Nahdi. In fact, you'll notice, those of you who are comfortable with the Arabic language, the Usman al-Nahdi is actually a person who is the last to narrate. But in English translation, right, the right side is the Arabic, the left side is the English. The English part does not actually tell you the entire chain. So hadasna Adam, hadasna So'watu, hadasna Qatada. It doesn't really list all of the chain of narration. Okay, it just lists the last part of the last person, Usman Nahdi. Okay, all right. While we were at Uthba bin Farqad al-Adarbijan, there came Umar's letter indicating that Allah's apostle had forbidden the use of silk. All right. So Prophet Muhammad has forbidden the use of silk, except this much. Then he pointed with his index and middle fingers. To our knowledge, by that he meant embroidery. So this is the first hadith regarding silk that is being forbidden. Let's talk about man or woman at this point in time, but let us move forward. The next hadith, which sometimes is, most of these hadiths are repeated anyways. So the second hadith, hadith Sahih al-Bukhari 5829. While we're at Azerbaijan, Umar wrote, "To us, Allah's messenger forbade wearing silk except this much." Then the Prophet approximated his two fingers, index and middle finger, to illustrate to us. Zuhair, the sub-narrator, raised up his middle and index fingers. Third, while we were at Uqba, Umar wrote to us, Prophet said, "There is none who wears silk in this world, except that he will wear nothing of it in the hereafter. Abu Uthman pointed out with his middle and index fingers. This hadith has also been narrated by Abu Uthman. This hadith number is Sahih al-Bukhari 58. Alright, let's do a couple more. While Hudayfa was at Al-Madian, he asked for water, whereupon the chief of the village brought him water in a silver cup. Hudayfa threw it at him and said, I have thrown it because I have forbidden him to use it, but he does not stop using it. Allah's Messenger said, gold, silver, silk, and dibaj, a kind of silk, are for them, the unbelievers, right, in this world, and for you, the Muslims, in the hereafter. So what essentially is happening here is that as we move forward through these different hadiths, here gold, silver, silk are for the unbelievers in this world and for the Muslims in the hereafter. So keep this in mind. The very next hadith, Sahih al-Bukhari 5832 says, the Prophet said, whoever wears silk in this world shall not wear it in the hereafter. So keep this in mind because this is very important as we navigate to the Quran. You will understand what is going on. So here the Prophet is saying, whoever wears silk in this world shall not wear it in the hereafter. I heard the next hadith, Ibn Abzubair delivering a sermon saying, Muhammad said, whoever wears silk in this world shall not wear it in the hereafter. So that's about it. I don't know if you've noticed, but there are no reasons given why silk should not be worn by the Prophet, right? If that's the case. Okay. So I'm not going to get into the dispute whether Sunnah is authentic or not, or the Hadith is authentic or not, but I'm just going through the text that is available to everyone. But no reasons whatsoever are given at this point in time. It's just, let's say a decision or a judgment, right? Given that we are actually reading through. Whoever wears silk in this world shall not wear it in the hereafter. Now, this directly contradicts the Quran, but of course, everything contradicts with the Quran. Once you actually get to the Quran, you'll see what I mean. But if you continue, all of these are pretty much the same. Prophet said, whoever wears silk in this world shall not wear it in the hereafter. Sahih al-Bukhari 5834. And of course, it continues, okay? None wears silk in this world, but he who will have no share in the hereafter again. Okay? Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 585. So these are all the chapter 25 is basically relates to the silk, gold, and so on. Okay? So here I've covered everything within the chapter 25. Perfect. So now that you understand this part, once again, no reasons are given, right? I mean, we don't know why. Absolutely no reason. It's just a judgment at this point in time. But let's move forward. Let's navigate to the Quran. Perfect. Bring up my agenda here. So the first verse where the word silk occurs is chapter 18, verse 31, which is again common to silk, brocade, and bracelets. So let's navigate to 18:31, which is Surah Al-Kahf. Here's 31. But before I actually read 31, let's take a look at a little bit of context. So God first talks about people who, are not believers, so to speak. Okay, so I'm going to start with verse 29, and then we'll continue. And say thou, the truth is from your Lord. Then whoso will, let him believe, and whoso will, let him deny. We have prepared for the wrongdoers a fire at walls encompassing them. And if they seek succor, they will be given succor by water like molten brass burning the faces. Evil the drink and evil the pillow. Verse 30. Those who heed warning and do good deed of righteousness, we suffer not to be lost the reward of a deed of one who does good. They have gardens of perpetual abode, ulaika lahum jannatun adn, beneath which rivers flow, tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. They are adorned therein with bracelets of gold. Yuhalluna fiha min asawir min dahab. Right? So these people who do what? Who are basically heed warning and they do deeds of righteousness. Okay? As a reward, they will enter the gardens, and then once they enter the gardens, once they enter Jannah, right? They are adorned therein with bracelets of gold. Now keep in mind the hadith that we talked about earlier, Sahih al-Bukhari, right? So if you wear gold bracelets in this world, you will not get it in Jannah. Which means, as a Muslim, for instance, the simple argument that if I'm going to wear, for instance, a bracelet of gold in this world, I'm not going to be entering Jannah as per Sahih al-Bukhari. But what happens if I do enter Jannah? That means the Prophet is contradicting the Quran, because the Quran is saying if anyone enters Jannah, they means whoever does deeds of righteousness, right? That's the criteria, the first criteria, those who heed warning and do deeds of righteousness, they will enter Jannah as a reward. And once they enter Jannah, they are adorned therein with bracelets of gold and wear green garments of finest silk and brocade. So once again, you have bracelets of gold, you have finest silk and brocade. So you have bracelets of gold and green garments of finest silk, right? Or yalbisuna means garments, right? Sayaban or yalbisuna, they'll wear. Khuzram means sundas was tabrak and brocade. So people who enter, the gardens beneath which river flows, in other words, Jannah, they'll be bracelets of gold, wear green garments of finest silk and brocade, reclining therein upon raised couches, excellent the reward and fair the pillow. So this is first instance, chapter 18, verse 31. In other words, Surah Al-Kahf, verse 31. And those of you who've actually read Surah Al-Kahf, this particular set of verses come in between the story of the seven sleepers and then the person who had the guard. Okay? All right. So let's bring up the agenda here one more time. Let's navigate to the second instance of the word silk, which is chapter 44, verse 53, and then chapter 44, verse 53, the word brocade has also been used in the same verse. So let's take a look at that. The silk and brocade God is talking about in chapter 44, verse 53. So I'm going to navigate to 44:53. Perfect. So this is Surah Al-Dukhan, chapter 44, Surah number 44, verse 5:3. But before, of course, we talk about the verse itself, let's navigate a little prior verses so we understand the context here as well. So I'm going to start with, let's see, verse 41, Surah 44. The day a friend can in nothing avail a friend, and they will not be helped, save he on whom God has mercy. He is the mighty, the merciful. The tree of Zaqqum, a food of the false, like molten brass, it seethes in the belly, like the seething of scalding. Take him and drag him to the midst of hell. Then pour over his head the punishment of a scalding liquid. Sayest thou, thou art the mighty, the noble. This is that whereof you doubted. Verse 51. Those of prudent fear are in a secure station, among gardens and springs, clothed in apparel of finest silk and brocade, facing one another. So here the criteria is straightforward. If you are in prudent fear, in al-muttaqeen, fi maqamim amin, you will be in a secure station. Fi jannatin wa uyun, among gardens of springs. And once again, you'll be clothed in apparel of finest silk and brocade, facing one another. Thus, we match them with pure, lustrous-eyed maiden. They call therein for every fruit and safety, and so on. So, once again, this is Surah 44, verse context is one. It's a comparative context where God is talking about people who will be thrown into fire, for instance, or they'll be in punishment, as opposed to individuals or muttaqeen, people who are in prudent fear. They'll be in secure stations. All right, perfect. So the third instance of the word silk is in chapter 76, verse 21. And then the word brocade also is in chapter 76, verse 21, or Surah 76, verse 21. And then the word bracelets also exists in the same Surah 76, verse 21. So let's explore 76, verse 21. Perfect. So this is Surah Al-Insan, okay, chapter 76 or Surah 76. Let's go to verse 21. So here it is. Upon them garments of finest green silk and brocade. Okay, but let's quickly take a look at and observe the actual context. Okay, so I'm going to scroll up and let's take a look at this. This is important because this surah talks in detail about the actual, the actual picture or the scene that is going on within the hereafter. So I'm going to navigate to, in fact, let's start with the start, okay? And let's navigate from Surah 1 or the first verse to verse 21. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the Almighty, the Merciful. Has there come upon man a time he was not something remembered? We created man from a drop of mingled fluid. We will test him. We made him hearing, seeing. We guided him on the way. Be he grateful or be he ungrateful. So once again, this is another criteria. Okay, so keep this criteria in mind. Of course, when I conclude, I have created the entire list. Let's move forward. Verse 4. We have prepared for those who spurn guidance while claiming virtue, chains and yokes and an inferno. The virtuous will drink of a cup whereof the mixture is of camphor, a spring whereof the servants of God cause it to gush forth abundantly. They fulfill the vow, Yufuna bin Nazar. So once again, this is another criteria. So these people fulfill the promises, right? Or what is the actual promise that it is, of course, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Go back to Surah, the first Surah, Surah Fatih, right? The opening. And fear a day, the evil of which is widespread. Another criteria. And give food for love of him to the needy and the fatherless and the prisoner. Once again, this is another criteria, right? You need to give food for the love of God, the needy, to the fatherless and prisoner. We but feed you for the countenance of God. We seek no reward or gratitude from you. So these people are not actually getting anything in return, nor their desire it. We fear from our Lord a dismal, restful day. So God will protect them from the evil of that day, cause them to meet radiance and happiness, and reward them for that they had been patient with a garden and silk, reclining therein upon raised couches. They see therein neither sun nor biting frost, and the shade thereof is near above them, and the fruits thereof within easy reach. Vessels of silver are moved about among them, not cups, but flagons, jugs, right? Flagons of silver, which they determined perfectly, and they're given to drink therein a cup whereof the mixture is of ginger, of a spring therein named Salsabil, and there move about among them youths made eternal. When thou seest them, thou would think them scattered pearl, and when thou seest their bliss and great dominion. Here's the verse 21. Upon them garments of finest silk and brocade, and they are adorned with bracelets of silver. So you have finest silk, you have brocade, and you have bracelets of silver. And we also read several key criterias that these people do in this world, obviously, before they actually get all of this. And their Lord is slaking the thirst with a purifying drink. This is for you as reward. So we covered chapter 18, chapter 44, chapter 76, which once again is common so far. Let's take a look at what's left. So we're yet to take a look at chapter 55, which is Surah Rahman, and verse 54. Okay, because here the word brocade is used. So let's navigate to verse or chapter 55, verse 54. Perfect. So Surah Rahman, which is Surah number 55, let's go to the relevant verse here, which is 54, reclining upon carpets lined with brocade. So now you have carpets that has embroidery, that has beautiful patterns, okay? So, and what is this surah telling us basically? Surah Rahman, which is a very interesting surah because it says فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ and repeats itself every single time throughout the surah. So basically what God is saying here, then which of the blessings of your Lord will you repudiate? So here's another criteria. We are not here to repudiate any blessings that God has given to us. So those people who do not repudiate the blessings of God, They will have the reclining, they'll be reclining upon carpets lined with brocade, and of course, fruits of both gardens hanging low. Then which of the blessings of your Lord will you repudiate, and so on. Okay? So once again, the word brocade is used within Surah number 5, verse 4. All right, let's continue. So we've covered Surah number 18, 44, Surah 76, Surah 55. Let's navigate to Surah number 22, verse 23. Okay, that's where the word bracelets occurred. So 22, 23. Perfect. Great. Hajj means an argument, which is chapter 22. Let's go to verse 23. Inna Allaha yudkhilul lazina amanu wa amilu salihat jannatin tajri min tahti al-anhar. So God makes those who heed warning and do deeds of righteousness enter gardens beneath which river flows. Yuhalluna fiha min asawir min dahab, wherein they are adorned with bracelets of gold and pearls. Okay? And their raiment therein is silk, and they were guided to the good of speech. So once again, we have the word bracelets of gold. And the context here is, if I scroll up a little bit, just talking about, once again, people going towards punishment versus people, entering Jannah. Okay, all right, perfect. So this is, once again, Surah Al-Hajj, chapter 22, verse 23, that talks about bracelets of gold, pearls, and raiment therein is silk. All right, let's navigate to chapter 35, which also talks about bracelets, and verse 33. So Surah number 35, verse 33. Perfect. So this is Surah Fatir, Surah number 35. Verse 33 talks about gardens of perpetual abode, Jannat, again, repeating itself, right? So the Quran talks about the same thing in different contexts. They enter them adorned therein with bracelets of gold and pearl, and their raiment there is silk, which is pretty much the same, repeated, one again and again. And the context, let me scroll up a little bit, starts from verse 32, for instance. Then gave we the law as an inheritance to those whom we have chosen among our servants. Among them is he who wrongs his soul, and among them are those lukewarm, and among them are the front runners in the good deeds by God's leave. Okay, so these are kind of types of people. The person who wrongs his soul, there's people who are lukewarm, like right in the middle somewhere, right? And among them are the people who are front runners in good deeds. Once again, another criteria, by God's leave. That is the great favor. Gardens of perpetual abode, they enter them adorned therein with the bracelets of gold and pearls, and their raiment therein is silk. And they will say, praise belongs to God, who has removed grief from us. Our Lord is forgiving, appreciative. So this is chapter 35, verse 33. Let's do one more. I believe this was the last one, which is chapter 43, verse 53. Talks about the word bracelets. So Surah 43, verse 53. Great. So this is Surah Zukhruf, chapter 43, and verse is 53. Oh, that armlets of gold had but been cast upon them, or angels had but come with him as associates. This is the story of Pharaoh and Musa, and this is where the word armlets of gold or the bracelets of gold come into play. Because if I scroll up a little just so that you understand the context, it starts with verse 51. And Pharaoh called to his people, saying, O my people, is then the dominion of Misr not mine, and these rivers flowing beneath me? Will you then not see? Am I better, or is this? Who is despised and barely makes clear? Oh, that armlets of gold had but been cast upon him, or angels had but come with him as associates, and he swayed his people, and they obeyed him. Right? So Pharaoh is basically challenging Musa's presence, and because Musa is talking about one God and the fear of God, and Pharaoh is saying, well, that's not happening. And Pharaoh is basically now saying in verse 53 does he have any armlets of gold, right? Or does he, bring any angels with him? Okay. as helpers or associates. So these are the instances of the word silk, brocade, and bracelets of all of the verses in the Quran in context. So now that we've covered what God is saying about silk garments, embroidery, brocade, the carpets being brocaded, bracelets, sitting on couches in front of each other, right, entering Jannah. Let's take a look at the criteria that I've compiled from all of these verses. In other words, these criteria will determine who enters Jannah and who'll be wearing silk, brocade, and bracelets. But before I do this, the question remains, can we wear garments, brocade, and bracelets in this world? Well, throughout all of these verses, God never said it's haram. You cannot wear these. And God never talks about not wearing them in this world, for instance. Okay? Of course, God talks about modesty in other verses, but those are separate videos that I've created for them. But nowhere in the Quran it says it's haram. All right. Whereas in the hadith that we looked at earlier, right, in Sahih al-Bukhari, demonstrated that. You've seen those numbers, hadith numbers, right, in Sahih al-Bukhari. You'll notice that the Prophet is, saying, contradicting what God is saying in the Quran. Okay, so, and that's of course not the case, because the Prophet cannot say anything that goes against the Quran. Okay, so again, that's up to you to decide. But this is my research so far. Let me quickly bring up the conclusion or the summary, where the criteria for obtaining these silk brocade and bracelets, right, for entering Jannah. So 6 points basically. First, those who heed warning. In other words, those who believe and do deeds of righteousness. This is once again coming from chapter 18, verse 30. These are the same verses that we just talked about, okay, in depth, but talk about these criteria as well. So the first one, the first criteria, if you need to enter Jannah, if you need to, be wearing silk and have these brocaded carpets or dresses or garments and wear gold bracelets, okay, you need to do deeds of righteousness. That's the first thing. Second, you need to be in prudent fear, according to God. Third, you need to be grateful. You need to be virtuous or good. You need to fulfill your vow, your promise. Serving one God alone. And you need to fear the day of judgment. You need to be, always be fearing. It can come anytime. You need to be giving food to the needy, fatherless, to prison, without asking any reward in return. And you need to be fear of a distressful day, right? The day of judgment. And these are the references for all the verses. Number 4, the criteria is not repudiate blessings of God. And number 5, those who heed warning, in other words, those who believe and do deeds of righteousness. So number 1 and number 5 are exactly the same. So you need to be always doing deeds of righteousness and warning. And of course, number 6, the last criteria is front runners in good deeds. Sabaku khairat. Run towards khairat, run towards good things. So these are the criteria for what you're going to get in Jannah. That's how continue to do all of these 6 criteria. That's what God is mandating us to do. Notice throughout these verses, by the way, you have not noticed that God is not talking about, anything else. God is not talking about, for instance, Siyam or Salat or Hajj or Zakat. None of that, okay? It's just these 6 things. And of course, we also took a look at the context of all of these verses as well. Here it is. So is it haram to wear silk garments, brocade, and bracelets? Well, you can now decide very clearly and openly, as per the Quran. It is obviously nowhere the word haram or any of this root word even exists nearly within any of these instances of the Quran, and even within context it does not exist. Okay, whereas in Sahih al-Bukhari it's just an opposite case. So if that's the case, if you have to choose or decide, then the Quran is clear, because the Quran says if you come across any question and you need to think about it, of course the preference or the precedence is given to the Quran itself. And of course Prophet Muhammad, he's bound to follow the Quran. He's bound to do what the Quran is mandating Prophet to do. Okay, Prophet obviously cannot go against any of the words said in the Quran or by God, because he's the messenger of God, and we are follow the messenger of God. So how can the messenger of God say something that is opposite to the Quran or contradicting the Quran itself? So I hope this helped. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm going to leave all of these references in the description area. If you have any questions, post in the discussion area. And also check out my other videos on, I made several other lectures by researching the Quran only. So once again, thank you for watching. Assalamu alaikum.